Pokemon Black and White speedruns have had an interesting development cycle since folks began speedrunning the games. From the get-go, we knew that Tepig would be the best and fastest starter Pokemon for speedrunning on its own, but later came to realize a different Pokemon might just be faster because of the weirdest oversight. But how did it come to this, you might ask? Well, let's rewind a bit and see where things might have gone off track. Back before August of 2016, RNG manipulations were limited in what they could do for a Pokemon speedrun. This was due to speedrunners using IGT, or what's known as the in-game timer, to time their speedruns. And to accurately time your speedrun with the in-game timer, saving and resetting was not allowed, since doing any sort of restarting would not accurately count any of the gameplay towards the in-game clock. In fact, many things didn't either. Pulling up the menu, going inside of doors, Pikachu crying in Pokemon Yellow, or even being in the intro portion of the game would not count towards the in-game clock. It was quite a messy system and was sometimes downright inaccurate compared to the modern method of timing, RTA. RTA stands for real-time attack, which basically means every second spent playing the game is timed from new game to the Hall of Fame for Pokemon speedruns. This revolutionized so many things for a ton of Pokemon games, but not immediately for Pokemon Black and White. You see, Pokemon Black and White had a method of playing the game that did not need a save and reset to obtain the fastest Pokemon at the time, and that Pokemon was the fire starter Tepig. With how the Nintendo DS treats Generation 5 RNG manipulations, getting a starter with perfect stats was easy to execute, but hard to find considering everyone who wanted to compete for the best times had to develop their own RNG manipulations. You see, there's a small number in every Nintendo DS called a DS MAC address, and this address is unique to every Nintendo DS to ever exist. Most people might have never even used this number for anything, but speedrunners would for the first time in Pokemon speedrunning history, because unlike in Generation 4 Pokemon games, where the RNG manipulations are the same for every person, Generation 5 would tie the RNG to this unique MAC address, meaning even you at home might have access to the fastest Nintendo DS in the world for Generation 5 Pokemon speedruns. This RNG manipulation would start inside of your room in New Vema Town, and then be dragged all the way into Accumula Town right before these two X-Transceiver calls that would scramble the RNG each time you went into one, making it hard to get zero encounters all the way to the next town. Why Tepig, you might ask? Well, it's just a better Pokemon than the other starters, with its high base attack and dual firefighting typing, making it an easy fit alongside moves like Ember, Flame Charge, Brick Break, Rock Smash, and Flare Blitz, letting it plow through gym leaders and trainers with ease. Just like you can plow through some sick Pokemon speedrunning content by subscribing to the channel. The only times it really had troubles it couldn't handle on its own were with the first gym leader, Cress. You see, this gym's battling twist involves using an elemental monkey that counters your starter Pokemon, creating an issue that would need an extra Pokemon to solve it the fastest way possible. When going towards the Dream Yard and beating two trainers, you'll get access to one of the 3 elemental monkeys that opposes the first gym leader. And for Tepig, that monkey would be Pansage. Pansage on its own is awful, but it's a really nice HM employee that learns, cuts, and takes out the water monkey faster than Tepig ever could. As you progress the story more, you'll come across Team Plasma, who usually have a normal, dark, or poison-type Pokemon for you to face, all of which will be easily obliterated through a non-resisted fire move or a super effective fighting move. And man, are there a ton of plasma fights to get through. In fact, you'll get interrupted by them before almost every gym, which is a good thing when you have access to Lucky Egg so early on. After progressing past Cress, Lenora, Berg, Lisa, and Clay, you'll enter Chargestone Cave where the Lucky Egg is shoved in your face immediately. And what a beautiful item it is, almost doubling the EXP you gain from the moment you equip it. This will let you reach level 61 by the time you get to the Elite Four, giving you a whopping 13 level lead to dunk on each and every one of them. And with this amazing route, it felt like there wasn't much more wiggle room left for optimizing black or white. While we did look at Pokemon like Drillbur that dominated white too, it just couldn't be used optimally during the IGT era, since you couldn't save and quit for good stats. And even when we switched to RTA, it wouldn't get access to Iron Head, the move Excadrill uses to dominate white too, which also happens to only be available through Move Tutor in Pokemon White too. And when looking at most other Pokemon you could get early on, they just seem slower than brute forcing with Tepig on its own. But one day, we would finally all be proven wrong. This route had been theorized early on by Worcester, but was never put into play until Japanese Pokemon speedrunner Buster Poke gave it a go. This route took advantage of the RTA change that has now been around for almost 10 years, and it was one that chose Snivy instead of Tepig early on. But not because it was the best. In fact, it's probably the worst, which makes it the best. We'll get into that in a minute, because after 3 entire Rebel fights and the 2 RNG scrambling X transceiver calls, we'll save and reset inside of the gate before Route 2, then with some precise RNG minute movement, we'll get access to a perfect IV Lillipup, who happened to be the answer to be the new fastest Pokemon for speedrunning Pokemon Black and White. Why, you might ask? Well, it starts off with a few things I mentioned earlier about Tepig. While Tepig could RNG minute from the first town to the second town, the precision required to drag it further would bring a massive problem to the table. But for Lillipup, it just became another part of the RNG minute process, since the precision of getting past 2 X transceiver calls was no longer an issue. The next reason was skipping the monkey in the Dream Yard. By picking Snivy, we'd have a weak Pokemon that could be taken out easily to avoid double battles and get us past the only HM required in the game, Cut. You see, this cut bush is located inside of the Dream Yard, right next to where you get the Elemental Monkey. But since you don't need that monkey anymore as an HM employee or a Pokemon to clear the first gym, you can now skip grabbing the monkey and one entire trainer fight along the way, giving Lillipup even more wiggle room to beat Tepig. But the biggest time save of them all isn't a mechanic hidden in plain sight. While Generation 5 has a ton of mechanics like this, the only mechanic that would make a difference for speedrunning Pokemon is the weight mechanic. When sending out a Pokemon that isn't Diglett Dugtrio or a Pokemon that floats above the surface of the battlefield, you'll get this small shaking effect as the Pokemon land, and the length it takes for a Pokemon to fully land on the ground depends on the weight of the Pokemon. This animation ranges between low, medium, and high weight, and this difference between landing animations equals up to a total of 1 entire minute saved from the Lillipup line landing faster than the Tepig line. While their base evolutionary forms have the same weight animation, there becomes a glaring difference once each of them has evolved, especially when comparing the final evolutions to each other. It's such a small detail and one that's so easy to miss when Emboar made getting through the game so easy. But sometimes the smallest waves make the biggest splash, and Lillipup proved this with a quirky mechanic like weight. Subscribe for more Pokemon speedrunning content and check out the playlist on the right for more videos like this one.